The pain of her tortured body was so intense that she could barely breathe. Emotions came and went as wild thoughts ran through her mind. She wanted to flee, but there was nowhere to go. She wanted to make herself small and curl into a ball, but her pregnant belly didn't allow it. She wanted to just lay there and die. However, how could she, knowing she was carrying another life within her? Hello, welcome to In My Words. The book I am reading from is titled The Monster We Call Dad by D.A. Riles. This book is not intended for young readers. After each reading session, I will briefly give information about a chosen plant. I hope through my words you will gain insight, knowledge, and a deeper appreciation and understanding of this mysterious and intricate world. Though the road may be long and hard, compassion and beauty can be gained through the enjoyment of nature and experiencing its wondrous gifts. Thank you for joining me. Feeling the hairs on the back of his neck lift, Dad abruptly stopped his pacing and quickly turned on his heel toward the children, making one booming stomp in their direction, just as a wild beast does before it goes after its quarry. Dad was satisfied with the snot-nosed brat's response to his threat as he watched the frightened children quickly run to the light blue 1955 station wagon. Seeing the children's antics made the monster stop its attack upon them and focus his attention back on his perceived problem. Testosterone raging through his body, eyes ablaze with hatred and contempt, his hand was still clenching the wad of hair as he rose it high above his head in triumph. A bitter laugh escaped his sneering lips as he said to Jane, "You're worthless. Whatever made you think your life had value? Do you really think that anyone would want a effing piece of S like you?" Tomas looked up at his fisted hand as the sun silhouetted his raised arm. A sense of fulfillment flowed through his body. A rush of blood refueled his soul. He felt invincible. He felt alive. No reaction came from Jane as Tomas continued his taunts. "What, now you're too effing stupid to talk?" Hearing Dad's hateful words, the three children were drawn to the scene which was happening outside, hoping the violence would end quickly. Their small faces were framed by the open window as they peered out, watching as the tirade continued. Joe opened the heavy door, and the three young children jumped into the back seat of the vehicle. It was quite hot inside, so they rolled down the windows as they hastily sat upon the hot seats. "Oh, if there is a God," he laughed sardonically, "then you really made a mistake when you made this bee laying on the ground. She's a worthless piece of crap." Opening his clenched hand, he spread his fingers wide. Fine wisps of black hair fell to the ground. A light breeze blew across the hairs and stirred them just enough to blow them back toward Tomas. Feeling as if the black strands were mocking him, Tomas kicked his wife in the back, making the wisps fly up into the air and away from his body. "Ah!" Jane screamed as the heavy foot connected deeply into her spine. The Badlands echoed her cry, reverberation after reverberation, sending an odd chill through Thomas's body. A small mumbling sound escaped Scott's tiny mouth as the young boy watched the brutality of the beating taking place outside of the uncomfortably sun-heated station wagon. He could feel his mom's pain, but was unable to help. Tears welled up in Scott's eyes, never to be shed. Turning his haunted mind from the scene, Scott tried to take solace in the comforting words coming from Sissy and Joe as the three children talked in hushed tones. Moaning softly, Jane allowed her thoughts to drift from her mind. The pain of her tortured body was so intense that she could barely breathe. Emotions came and went as wild thoughts ran through her mind. She wanted to flee, but there was nowhere to go. She wanted to make herself small and curl into a ball, but her pregnant belly didn't allow it. She wanted to just lay there and die. However, how could she, knowing she was carrying another life within her? Closing her mind to the pain, she knew she had to keep control, for Tomas enjoyed the power he wielded over her. With the silence that Jane chose to take, Tomas no longer had the upper hand, for it was no fun to inflict pain when there was no reward of fear. Pushing the tip of his now scuffed shoe against her back, he said distastefully, "I didn't kick you that hard, you stupid bee. Now stop acting like a baby and get the F up." For a brief moment, the monster stared at the being on the ground, unsure of her true condition. Momentarily, Tomas saw his wife through clear eyes, and with a racing mind, he briefly questioned himself. Is she all right? But the moment was too brief. The monster returned, and through its demented mind, all it could see was a willing victim cowering beneath him. The booming voice seemed to be far off in the distance. Sounds in Jane's brain began to dim and blur. Words faded as the numb mother looked further into herself. Sudden fatigue set in as the young woman succumbed to the horror of her life. Laying deathly still on the hot, rocky soil, Jane's thin black-rimmed glasses dangled precariously from one ear. Her breathing shallow, every breath was painful, particles of dust from the soil drawing into her nostrils, each breath nearly choking her as she inhaled. Thomas looked at the pathetic woman laying on the ground. Showing no remorse or emotion for what he did, he commented with revulsion, "Walk the F home, then. I don't effing care." Swiftly turning away, not once did Thomas glance back. He left Jane lying helpless on the ground, nauseous, clutching her stomach. The children watched as Dad walked over to the car. Fear gripped their small bodies as they saw him position himself in the driver's seat. Putting the key in the ignition and starting the car, Dad drove off without Mom. The three children looked at each other with wide eyes. They knew they wouldn't be able to say anything to Dad at this moment, for they knew his emotions were too raw and any attempt of reasoning would cause the monster to come back. Jane heard the car pull away as dust settled around her. A small coughing sound escaped her lips as she closed her heart to the world. Silence filled the air as the defeated mother faded into unconsciousness. Today's highlighted plant is Beta vulgaris, also known as beets or beetroot. Beets come in many different colors. There are red, golden, purple, white, and red striped. There are also sugar beets, but I will not be discussing the sugar beet today. Beets need a soil temperature of between 40 and 50 degrees to germinate. They grow well at 70 degrees. They need to be planted 1/4 inch deep with 3 to 4 inches of space between each plant. Beets are able to be grown into containers, so they make a good deck plant. Planting in a container also helps a person to get an early start on the season. Beets don't like to be transplanted, but if you choose to do this, then be careful not to damage the root, for that is where the bulb grows from and will cause the beets to stop growing. The root of the plant, which most people know of as the actual beet, is edible. The leaves are also edible. The leaves have a tart and earthy taste. They can be eaten raw or cooked. Many people use them in salads. The root can be cooked, pickled, or eaten raw, but the root is very tough to eat when not cooked. When the beet grows to over 4 inches, they can become woody. They are still edible, but are tough and the taste is diminished. For storage, you can store your harvested beets in your basement if it is cool enough. For the longest storage, beets prefer 32 degrees with a 95% humidity. I realize that this is not possible for most people to attain. However, for myself, I store them in my basement in a box with either newspaper between each level of the beets, or I have also used sand, and I just place them in the sand a few inches apart from each other, making sure that they do not touch. Be sure to check your produce at least weekly to prevent any fruit or vegetable from rotting. Today's plant highlight was beets. Thank you for joining me. I hope you will join me again next week. Please like, share, and subscribe. Next week, I will highlight another plant and continue reading. If you would like to follow along with this reading, you may pick up the book titled The Monster We Call Dad by D.A. Riles at Amazon.com. I look forward to having you join me next week.